get into notes, that's easy, type whatever you want. Here's the heart of the formula. When people say, I have a formula, this is the part they're thinking of in general, which is this procedure section. This procedure section is where you're truly saying, this is how I make this. The easiest and most basic are in the ingredients. And a lot of times that's all people start out with are the ingredients themselves. So I'm going to use my training items that I set up this morning. Here's my smart lookup in action again. I just typed BC and I hit tab and it brought up everything that had BC in it. So I can do this in formula entry as well. So I'm going to do that. Maybe I'll put in a pound of that. To insert additional lines, here's where that, look at the ribbon, insert and phase. All right, I'm going to come back and deal with unit, procedure, and operation in a minute. I'm just showing you a very basic formula. BC again. So I at least have 3 raw materials in here. When people talk about a formula, at least at the basic level, this is what they're talking about. Here are my raw materials, here are their relative quantities. Know that what is important from the quantity perspective is the relative quantities. We really don't care what the total number is. We care that the quantities are correct in relation to each other. The total quantity is going to come back later when we deal with the finished good, so you really don't have to worry about it here. From a vicinity perspective, entering 1, 2, 3, is going to end up being the same as 10, 20, 30, 100, 200, 300. It really doesn't matter. Is the ratio that becomes important to me. Okay? So we have some people that their formulas tend to size, that they start them in the lab and they do 1 pound formulas because the lab is doing these little sample batches. That's cool. We got other people who their formulas always add to 100 because then the quantities they see are always a percentage. That's cool. We have other people that their formulas add up to their typical tank size because that way they don't have to size their batch at all, and so their formula always adds up to whatever the tank is. That's cool. I don't care. Okay? So whatever makes sense to you, we'll deal with sizing it later when we get finished. Notice that in my system, I'm seeing weight and volume. If you're only seeing one or the other and you need to see both, let me know. There's a checkbox for that. Some people only need to see one or the other, and that's great, so we've got a way to hide it. But if you need to see both, we can do that. If you're seeing both, keep an eye on both and make sure that it's sort of checking out mentally. These weight and volume are always converting to your system weight and volume units of measure. I think I should have done that company setup first. In my system, those are pounds and gallons. So my weight column is always pounds, my volume column is always gallons. Make sure they're making sense. Percent by weight and percent by volume, they're not the same. That's because my raw material ingredients have different densities. Okay, so I can see both of those. Because we set up those global units of measure conversions and then we have the individual item units of measure conversions on the items, I have drop downs here. Maybe I don't want to formulate in pounds, I want to formulate in gallons. I could switch all of these. This quantity column right here is called the display unit of measure, and this quantity is always whatever this unit of measure is showing. Okay? If I have an item that has a particularly small quantity, you know, maybe I'm doing everything in pounds, but I need to do one particular item in grams because it's itty bitty. No problem, find the way there. Okay? So you can play around with that. What does happen a lot of times if you have both lab and production, lab might be doing everything in grams. And so you set up your formula in grams, you play with it, you doctor it, you do whatever you need to do. When it becomes a production formula, We really want it to show on the production ticket as all pounds without having to do anything to it. You might at that point in time convert all of them to something else. And it's just switching off the drop-down boxes before you start cutting batch ticket. We have some other things we can do with the batch ticket as well, but just something that happens if you have both lab and production coordinator. That's the very basic. So last time I did all the gobbledygook and then I came back to the very basic. This time I started, this is the very basic. If you've got to enter a formula and you're just going for the nitty gritty, your ingredients, your relative quantities, you have a formula you could work with and do a batch ticket if you had to. Right? Now we get to the fun. Notice how I'm having to switch ribbons to hit save. This is where I had that context sensitive procedure ribbon to hit save. That's why I like to come in here and do these other things, because I like to be able to get to them. In the formula, one thing to notice is we have this tree structure going on. That tree is unit procedure, operation, and then this is called the phase level. I can name these just by keying. So for the unit procedure, this is now Jen's unit procedure, whatever it is. Maybe it's mix, maybe it's wash, maybe it's throw it in a tank. Process units are assigned at the unit procedure level. So my process units in my system happen to be some mixers and some machines and a line. I can assign a mixer unit. Keep in mind, this is your master formula. It's not an individual batch. So if this particular formula is sometimes made on mixer 1, but sometimes made on mixer 2, sometimes made on mixer 3, and it's kind of an even split, you might not want to put this in here because you'd always be changing it. But if this type of formula always goes to mixer 1, then it would make a lot more sense to put it in here. And if mixer 1 has capacity, whatever it is, 100 pounds, 1,000 pounds. And you can also fill in things like setup time and run time on that particular unit procedure. This stuff has actually always been in the system, so even if you're a V2 person, this stuff is in the system. It was much more hidden, so it's never had to use. So we made it very obvious. So if you're not using it, then you've got more stuff on the screen, but hopefully it'll get people using more, and it does start playing into some planning conversations, some different reporting conversations, different things like that. So we try to make it a lot more obvious to you. The operation level, once again, you can also name that. Know that QC tests are assigned at the operation level. So if I do certain QC tests at one point in time and other QC tests at a different point in time, I might create 2 separate operations for that. Additional costs, which are things like labor, overhead, if you're trying to throw those into your formula, those are done at the unit procedure level. So if you want to do an additional cost of a penny a pound based on these ingredients, you might have 1 unit procedure and then maybe do 2 cents a pound for these other ingredients. You can have different unit procedures. So you're providing structure for either costing purposes, quality purposes, or just instructional purposes to make something that prints nicely for your batch ticket and helps your production workers actually know how to make it right. When you get to the phase level, I put in ingredients, because those are the very basics. But we have some more types. So if I do a couple extra phase lines, show you what those are. Do pick your phase, or pick this type before you start filling in your data. So if you make it an ingredient line and then you change it and decide, no, I want that to be an instruction line, it's not always very happy. So pick this first and then enter the data for that type. We have instruction lines. On an instruction line, there we go. Instructions right now are over here. I can enter enter instructions on a pure instruction line. I can also enter instructions on an individual ingredient line as well. I don't have to have a separate instruction line. So I can do it on there. So instruction line is one type. A formula text phrase. This is if I have some certain phrases that I use a lot, and I really don't want to have to type them all the time. So I happen to have these 3 that are set up. Mix thoroughly for 15 minutes at low speed are my mix instructions. I can select this. It fills it in for me. It's actually filling it in over here. If I use a text phrase, the one nice thing about it is if there's a change later. So instead of 15 minutes, someone says, well, you now have to mix for 16 minutes. I don't have to touch every formula. I could just go to the text phrase, change it there, and all my formulas get that new, whatever it is.
That's what we're
Exactly, if you do it as a text phrase. If you do it as an instruction, then it's individual to this formula. You have to touch the different formulas. So there are places for both. And then the other type, it's actually 2 types. I'll just show you one: byproducts and co-products. Byproducts or co-products are things that come out of the formula. It's not really the intended finished good. It's just this extra thing that you bleed off of, or that you bleed off and can use. You can enter that as a byproduct or a co-product. The difference between the 2 is a little bit of costing. One of them goes as standard cost, the other gets a batch cost. We'll deal with that if we need it. So just know that byproduct is out there. Byproducts and co-products is a way to get things out of the formula.
So each batch that we run, we have to have a moisture and pH to amount that we can pour. Do we do that on the batch ticket, or do we have to do it here each time?
The fact that you need to do the test.
We need to have the percentage to put in there to know how much we're going to use.
So you do the test, and based on the results of the test, you decide how much you're going to use. I don't have a quick answer for that. You could set up the test itself. Because when you're doing that batch, you're going to want to test what your pH is and how much moisture. So there's a place to set up a QC test. We don't have like a lab way of recalculating based on that. I think there's some discussions about that. So I about Randy, and I'm not sure what you're doing now to make it happen, because you're having to do it now in our Vicinity.
Or we've not forced that.
Okay.
Which company are you with?
Tobacco.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, we talked about it when we were on site.
Okay.
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion around it. We can talk after.
What else can we do in here? Okay. So that's your basic structure. You can have more than one unit procedure in one operation. So that's just when you're up here and you do your insert a unit procedure instead. So this is now, you can do